guys, it's Quana, and this is my spoiler review of The Handmaid's Tale Season 5, Episode 7, entitled No Man's Land. This video is probably going to be one of my shortest, and I say that every time, so let's knock on wood and hope. But there's not as many sequences in this episode in terms of shifting POVs, so hopefully this recap and review will be a little bit shorter. This episode, I don't know, I have a lot of thoughts, so I'm going to be coming to you today with commentary about what happens, what are the implications about this episode. So hopefully you've had an opportunity to watch the episode so that I'm not spoiling too much for you. And before we get started, don't forget to click the subscribe button down below and help us out over here with the algorithm. All right, so let's talk about No Man's Land, because you guys saw my review last week. You know, last week's episode was definitely one of my favorites in show history. This episode was good, but I do have probably a few more like stylistic gripes about this episode, so my review will probably be not as ecstatic, if that makes any sense. But this episode starts right where last week's episode leaves off, with June being held by gunpoint by Serena and racing away in the vehicle after they've escaped the guard. June does not know what's going on, and I was a little frustrated in the first 5 minutes of this episode with just the lack of information processing that June seems to be not doing. Her inferencing skills are not up to par, and she's asking a lot of questions where she should be like putting multiple things together, and it takes her a while to kind of grasp the situation at hand. Serena is in the backseat in labor, and June is cognitively not aware. She's just going off of straight adrenaline. She's just like, I don't know what this woman is going to do. Are you trying to kill me? What is happening? What are we doing? And during one of her contractions, Serena fires the gun through the windshield, and June is like, no, I've had it. I'm done. She takes out of the car, takes off running, and leaves Serena pretty much abandoned in the middle of the road. Problem with this, and I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, was that they didn't actually kill old boy. Like, he had a bulletproof vest on. He was slightly winded for a few seconds. And so at what point does he not like connect back with the guys who held Luke and June at gunpoint and like kind of try to, you know, go and capture them? I kept waiting for that to happen, because this sequence, while it might have only been minutes, felt like it was taking a lot longer, because June is taking off running through the woods, and eventually Serena tries to get in behind the wheel of the car, but she crashes the car into a ditch. Been there, done that. I kind of felt a little bit of sympathy for her, because I have been in that predicament before. And she's in labor. June eventually goes back to the car, and it's like, what are you doing? Are you in labor right now? Like, what is happening here? And just asking these very asinine questions. And it's so funny because, you know, when you're in labor, you don't want anyone asking you questions in this moment. Eventually, she's like, okay, the car is stuck. She tries to move the car, and so they find this barn, and they go into the barn. I kept waiting, and I was so excited that they did reference a manger, because I was like, oh, look, she's going to probably think like her birth is miraculous because they're going to be, you know, in this barn, and it's like, oh, maybe she'll be giving birth in a manger. And June actually tells the joke, and I laughed out loud. I thought that was very humorous. But eventually we get the flashback sequence for this episode, which takes us back to June and Serena's earlier relationships and the first time they attend a birthing. And so we're going to be getting the parallels of that birthing with Serena's birthing, and this is very reminiscent of the Holly episode where June gives birth to Nicole, but in that episode she's having flashbacks to possibly, I don't know that she had flashbacks to Janine's birth in that episode, but I know that she was having flashbacks to her birth of Nicole, if I'm not mistaken, in that, I mean, not Hannah, in that episode. And so that these are the two parallels. In the flashback, and I'm going to kind of just summarize what happens in the flashback, but June and Serena arrive at the home of one of the wives whose handmaid of Clarence is about to give birth. And they're doing the whole, the wife behind the handmaid giving birth on her knee kind of Rachel and Bela kind of situation going on. And June is just still kind of like chuckling at the absurdity of it all. And she's making eye contact with Serena while this is going on. And Serena also is kind of amused by the absurdity of this situation. The problem that I have at this moment is by the time we see Janine's birth, Serena has definitely drunk the Kool-Aid and is all in with the absurdity of it all. Is planning these events for herself once June gives birth. And so it didn't feel like that placement was actually correct, because Serena had already had a handmaid prior to June, and it probably had gone through some of the processes, at least initially, before that handmaid ended her life. Likewise, when we see June's arrival earlier seasons, Serena is not at all, like not even minutely kind to June in the initial stages. She's only kind to June once June gets pregnant. So it feels like this is a little bit of a rewriting or a revisionist history of their earlier relationship. Unfortunately, of Clarence's birth is not going well, and eventually we see that there's blood running down her legs and she is not able to have the baby, and so they are going to perform a C-section. Now, I had thought that the baby was stillborn at that point, that the baby had died. However, they go through the process of like administering oxygen to her, putting her unconscious, cutting out the baby. Very crude mechanisms. It's very much an archaic form of the way in which they are performing this surgery, the procedure. They're not in the hospital, and it's almost as though they're relegating her immediately to death. Like, you don't see any of the trappings of like a actual hospital. Now, we know that Gilead has some pretty archaic practices, but from all intents and purposes, from what I've seen, there are some modern day healthcare practices that they kept. So I didn't really understand that. We see the handmaids are praying. I really love the return of Alma and Brianna, two of our favorite handmaids. They had been there since season 1, and of course we lost them in the crossing episode of season 4. So it was so great to see them again, to see these women younger. I'm assuming that this was filmed during this season, but they managed to make them look relatively younger, because this would have been about 7 years ago or so, unless this was filmed much earlier and just kind of canned and used for now. And eventually, June is witnessing all of this, and she's in shock and she's in disbelief. And we kind of are using this to ground to see the importance of giving birth and what this means to June, because June is someone who values the birthing process. She loves babies. She believes in, women's pregnancies. She believes in women's choices, but she believes in women's pregnancies. And so this is a very shocking moment for her. And eventually Clarence dies, but the baby does manage to live. As the handmaids are escorting of Clarence's body back to the Red Center for her final putting to rest, we see June and Serena make eye contact again. And there's this moment that passes where it's kind of like a moment of understanding between the two of them. Again, I don't recall this being the temperament of their relationship, that there was ever in those days any kindness between the two of them. I distinctly remember Serena being very harsh with June and very standoffish with June prior to the agreement between them that June will sleep with Nick and get pregnant with Nicole. So that felt very off, and I felt like you could have had the significance of this scene without it being like June and Serena making eye contact and having this understanding, because the importance to me of the scene was not so much that June felt any benevolence towards Serena, it was that she felt benevolence toward the birthing process. So when we go back into the barn and Serena is giving birth, it's then understandable that June, while she could take revenge against Serena and she could kill Serena and the baby, it's giving us the understanding that she won't. She views pregnancy and women as sacred, and this is the one thing she won't do. She won't become Gilead, and that was why that scene was so important, I thought. And so there were those moments that I felt like kind of took away from that. Now, as Serena is attempting to give birth, she does not trust June, rightly so, and June eventually attempts to leave, and she manages to get the car free. She goes back into the barn, though, because, again, she's unwilling to sacrifice Serena and leave Serena there to die. And eventually, she helps Serena through the birthing process. And when she has the baby, she gives the baby and Serena this look as though she's momentarily contemplating doing something to the baby. Now, that wasn't really that shocking to me, because I could definitely understand it. As my husband was in the background watching the show but not really watching the show, he was like, is she gonna drop that baby? I would have dropped that baby. And I was like, no, you wouldn't have dropped the baby. Like, they can't show her doing that. In this moment, the redemption isn't for Serena, it is for June. It is all of the animosity, the anger, and the violence that we've seen June doing in the previous episodes of this season and struggling with being set aside. June is retaining her humanity, and that is why this is important. And eventually, Serena holds the baby, and she says that she's going to name him Noah because, you know, he's going to be like the savior of humanity or whatever, like how Noah's ark saved humanity. I mean, miss me with that, because, hello, like, your son was born of you and Fred. Like, let's not put that much pressure on this boy. But I think, yeah, with the right training, perhaps he could be someone who doesn't uphold the patriarchy and becomes a humanist and just values humanity. But this is kind of the struggle in this episode, is Serena realizing, and then finally kind of talking to June about what's been happening with the Wheelers, why she can't go to a hospital, and her fears about who Noah's going to grow up to be. And it's June's turn now to give her this little pep talk and say he's going to become the person based off of who he's raised by and how you raise him. So if you raise him with values to not become what Gilead is, then he can become a great man. Serena knows that may not happen. At this point now, she's feverish, she's not doing well, she needs to go to a hospital, but she's very untrusting. And June is like, you are going to die and your baby's going to die unless we get you to a hospital. And Serena's kind of resolved herself to, like, what life is there for me, because eternally she still values Gilead, and yet she has no place in Canada. So she begs June to take Noah and to raise Noah with Luke. Like, Luke is a good man, your husband is a good man. And I love that moment of acknowledgement. It would have been great had Serena connected the dots to see, like, not only is Luke a good man and that this is her husband, you all stripped a wife from her husband simply for trying to flee a country they did not want to be in, and then turned her into a handmaid even though she was married. Like, that's always been a huge issue for me. It's just the hypocrisy of Gilead that they dismantled this marriage or invalidated the marriage because he had been previously married, even though we know that we could probably bet on, like, every finger and toe that some of those commanders had former wives. Like, let's be for real. But ultimately, June's pep talk does work. She convinces Serena that Serena can have a life. She can raise Noah to be a better man. And she gets her into the car, and we find them back in a hospital. I think they're in Canada at this point now. They've managed to make it across the border, and she's gotten her care. And we get all of Serena's fears, which are very valid, about things that go on in the hospital, about naturalistic practices, and, like, kind of like the struggle between natural practices and medicine, where they've taken the baby to the NICU to be cared for so that she can get healthy, but giving baby formula, she wants to be nursing the baby, all of those things, which are valid concerns, but also a little bit ridiculous in light of everything. And Serena's still just uncertain and untrusting of this world that's so different from the world that she's created in Gilead. June, again, she just kind of reassures her. She's there for her. She's comforting for her. It makes sense in this moment, being who we know June to be, despite the animosity between the two of them. Am I buying this redemption arc for Serena? No. I mean, it could be completely valid. But at the end of the day, am I, the viewer, rooting for Serena and it's kind of like, if those of you who are out there who are fans of The Walking Dead, it's kind of like trying to redeem Negan after his past misdeeds, specifically what he did to two of the Walking Dead family, and now convincing us that he's this good man, this good guy. Now, Jeffrey Dean Morgan plays him so well that he is a likable guy, and Yvonne plays Serena so well that she is slightly likable, but I still don't wish the best for her. Like, I still wish, like, I wish imprisonment for all time, like, or some, like, and her baby to be cared for by somebody else. And I think that that would be like justice for her. You know, I don't want her to be out somewhere free and thriving with her baby while she's literally erected the system that has caused women to be raped, mutilated, and all kinds of other atrocities. So when Luke arrives, first of all, let's talk about June goes back out to the office, and they're like, oh my gosh, were you in an accident? And she's like, can I use your phone? And she picks up the phone to call Moira, and Moira answers the phone with June. In what world, like, June didn't even say Moira, and then she says June, like, you know, and then cutscene, it was like June 1st, and that was so unbelievable. I don't know, this little moment that just kind of took me out of it. But eventually Luke does arrive. He is looking okay. He's not battered. He's put together. I guess he's had a chance to calm down now that he knows his wife is free. Like, I kind of expected him to be more erratic when he met her or got face to face with her again, because she was literally about to be sent back to Gilead, like literally about to die. And so it's a miracle, complete miracle, that she is still here and that she's okay. But he has called the Canadian authorities, and Serena is an undocumented immigrant, and so they detain her, and they're going to put her baby in child protective custody. I fully think June is going to try to get the baby, and Luke is going to resent her for that, because he wants no part. He wants Serena to burn and die and get her comeuppance. And June now is in a state of where she's torn, because where she was wanting Serena to be free, now she's witnessing her being detained and captured, and she's probably going to be torn between the reality of seeing Serena get punished, get some kind of ramifications for her actions, and what that puts off on her. So at the end of the day, that is where this episode leaves, and it's a big question, like, what is June going to do now? I love where we're setting up. This is episode 7, so we have 3 episodes left for the season. So there's some nice things happening with the placement of the show and how it's going to possibly pit June and Serena together. It's going to be interesting to see if we're to believe that Serena is now it's going to be in a full redemptive arc. Is she going to help try to dismantle Gilead? Like, what's going to happen? And what's going to happen with the Wheelers? Like, are the Wheelers somehow going to fight June for custody of baby Noah? That's what I think. I think we're going to get a courtroom drama somewhere between episodes 8, 9, and 10 between the Wheelers, June, and Serena, and it's going to be juicy, because we definitely don't want the Wheelers. Like, this is Gilead in Canada. We want them shut down, but they're still doing things by the legal law of Canada. So let's just see what's going to happen there with this episode. So while I like what the episode is setting up as potential, I didn't love this episode as much as last week's episode. I think I would give this episode like an 8.5, where last week's episode was like up there. It was really good episode. But let me know down below in the comments, do you believe Serena's redemption arc? Do you believe that she's going to be changed for the good? What did you think about the conversation? I thought there were beautiful moments, but again, there were some stylistic things that took me out of it. That stare that June gave, while I understood the reasoning behind it, it was kind of uncomfortable. The how long it took her to kind of connect the dots of what was going on. Just a couple of stylistic things that took me out of it. But I want to know what you guys thought of this episode. And do you think we're going to get a courtroom drama between the Wheelers, June, and Serena? Because that is my prediction. So we'll see next week if I'm right. But do me a favor, don't forget to click the subscribe button if you enjoyed this recap and review and commentary of episode 7, No Man's Land. And I will see you guys in the next video. Until then, toodles!